pre-algebra. This is 9.2 relations. So yesterday should have been a breeze. Now we're going to kind of get into what functions start looking like a little bit more. That'll be more Wednesday. But okay, so let's just jump right in. Name this 9.2 relations. Please make sure you open your book to page 350. So a relation is any ordered pair, any set. So if I were to say I have this, well, that's kind of a bad example. Let's say I have this point right here. This point is at 2, 1, and we know that. It's a relationship between this value of x and this value of y, right? You can't plot this point here unless you have both the x and the y. You would just kind of be running in one direction and not have all the information that you would need. So that's why these are called relations. It's just a fancy name essentially for an ordered pair. Or a coordinate point you might have heard as well. Okay, so let me plot a couple more points here, and we're going to kind of make, I guess we'll get to that tomorrow. Let's do that point here, and let's do one more right here. Okay, so let's give these their ordered pair. This is at -2, 4. This is at -3, -3. And this guy here is at 4, -2. We could write this as a relation, and we could write all 4 of these points like this. We could call it relation A, and he equals all 4 of these points. Okay, now we're going to list them in a bracket. So we'll list them like this. We'll say 2, 1, put it in its ordered pair, and then use a comma. -2, +4, and then use a comma. -3, -3, and lastly 4, -2. Okay, so all this means is, hey, I've got these 4 points, and they're all going to be a relationship A, and this is kind of how you plot them up there. Okay, well, you might have seen these words domain and range, and I mentioned them yesterday a little bit. Domain are all of my values of x. Anytime it says domain, I want to know, hey, for what values of x? All right, and for range, it's for what values of y. And you're going to get a little bit more familiar with these words. They're going to be very helpful with graphing in the future, even though it seems kind of pointless right now. No pun intended there. All right, so let's look at this. What are my values of x that exist in this relation A? Well, this is an x, this is an x, this one, and this one. So I'm going to list this up here as, so my domain, and we're just going to generally write it as D equals, and then we're going to list those points. And we generally list the points from least to greatest. So we'll say -3, -2, 2, and 4. For range, we'll use an R, capital R, and say equals, and we'll list my other points here, and again in order. Now, you do not have to list a number twice. I should have done an example where we had the same number. If you have, like if this were a 1 right here, you wouldn't have to list the number twice. It's possible that you would only have 3 numbers under range. So if there is a repeat, please do not put the repeat. That is shown in example 1 on page 350. So pause this, take a look at that if you need to, and see the difference there. Okay, so for the range, though, for this guy is going to be my 1, my 4, my -3, and my -2. Again, I'm going to put them in order from least to greatest when I list them. So now I need a 1 and a 4. Okay, that's how you state your domain and your range. You may be given them in a graph, and you might be given it in some relation written this way. You're going to have to be able to identify them both ways. Now we kind of looked at it here, both ways together. Okay, for our next example, I'm going to give you these points, and we're going to say that they're all in some relation. Let's call the relation B. I have these 5 points in my relation B. I'm going to write it as B equals, and then we're going to start our bracket and just kind of list them off. Now, when I do this, I prefer to kind of just get started by writing out the ordered pair for each one. It just helps me later. You don't have to do that if you can do that in your head. So this is -5, -3. This guy is 1, -4, 3, 2, 1, 5, and -2, 4. Now I can just kind of list these off from what I have up there. All right, 1, -4, 3, and 2. So I make this a little smaller. -2, 4, and 1, 5. This order doesn't really matter here. Okay, that would be the answer if I said write the set of ordered pairs. This is a set of the ordered pair or the coordinate point, right? Okay. Okay, so next example. Actually, I don't think we need a graph for this one. This is example 3 from page 351. Write the set of ordered pairs for relation G if y equals 2x for each ordered pair, and the domain of the relation is -2, 0, 1, and 3. Wow, a lot of information. Sounds a little bit confusing and crazy, but let's stop and try this here, and then we're going to jump into 2 skills check at the same time. Okay, all right, so let's break it down a little bit. I know that I have some relation G. Okay, now instead of knowing that it equals some set of ordered pairs, I know that it's y equals 2x. So if I know what y is, I could figure out what x is, and I can plug in a bunch of numbers, and I'm going to be given what numbers I need to plug in, because the other information that I know is that the domain is -2, 0, 1, and 3. Well, what do I know about the domain? Well, I know the domain are all my values of x, right? So I know that I'm going to have some list of ordered pairs, okay, and I'm going to have 4 of them. There's going to be 4 points in this relation, and I know that my x's are -2, 0, 1, and 3, right? I just don't know what the y's are that go with it. Does that make sense so far? I pulled that straight from here and plugged them into that ordered pair. Let's see if I can't move that. Okay. Well, this piece of information here is pretty important, isn't it? If I know that x is something, if I plugged in a real number here and I just doubled what x is, isn't that what y would be? So every time I have y, it's half of x, or if I have x, it's twice what y is. So if I were to say that x equals 1, well, 2 times 1 equals 2, so y would equal 2, right? If I said that x is 0, get a different color here, I can say y equals 2x. I can plug it in this way. Y equals 2 times 0. Well, what is 2 times 0? Oh, I guess y equals 0 when x equals 0. So that one's actually at the origin. You can kind of plug those in, right? If I said that x equals -2, right? This is going to be this first one here. Well, let's plug this in. Y equals 2, and instead of x, I actually know what x is now. So y is going to be -4 when x is -2. It's not just like some answer for y, and y is always that. These are changing. Your y's and your x's are always changing because it's some relation of all of these different points. Yeah, y is -4 when x equals -2 because that's that one point that I can plot. But these other y's aren't going to be -4 because they have a different x, and it doesn't mean it's all the same point. Hope that makes a little bit of sense here. Okay, so let's try our next one. If x is equal to 3, y is equal to 6. And there you have it. This here is your answer. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to try skills check 1. Let's try number 2 and try skills check 2. These are both on page 351. And let's just try number Oops. Let's try number 1. So pause the video, try these, and we are going to go over the answers together. Okay, welcome back. How'd you do? Let's look at skills check 1, number 2. You have some relation B, and you have 4 different coordinate points, and it asks you to find the domain and the range. So we're going to say that the domain equals, and you just had to list in order from least to greatest all of your values of x. So the first number, you should have had -7, -6, -4, and 3. And you also need to say the range. Go ahead and use these brackets. I think I've talked to you about this before. If you guys are struggling making the bracket, make a little S and then make a backwards S. And when you put it together, it kind of makes that a bracket. It does not have to look perfect. Just kind of get something that looks a little bit brackety. Okay, so for range here, the unique thing was that we ended up having 2 8s. So we had a -1, we had a 7, and I'm not going to list 8 twice. I am only going to list it once. And this is kind of what I was talking about before. We're just going to have 3 numbers there for the range, and that's fine. Okay, now when I list it in an ordered pair, like it's shown, the list of ordered pairs, that you obviously have to use the 8 twice. But if you're just talking about your domain and range, that's all you need. Okay, skills check 2, number 1. You basically just had to kind of list. It did not tell you the name of these ordered pair or the relation, so we didn't have like A equals and then something. You just needed to use the brackets and give me the coordinates to the points. You should have had a -4, 6. We also had a 5, -7, and our last point, what is that, a -6, 5. Okay, those are the 2 answers for our skills check. Okay, so we're going to try example 5. This is on page 352. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because this is similar to some of our other ones. Sorry about my kids in the background. Okay, this is relation J. All right, this is relation J. If y is equal to x plus 3. So anytime you have some value of x, you just have to add 3, and you know what y is. It goes with that x. Remember, every ordered pair is a relation. There's 2 numbers that go with each one. So if your domain is given to be -4, 0, and 3, well, I know my points. I have 3 points. And I'm going to have a -4, I'm going to have a 0, and I'm going to have a 3, and I'm going to add. I'm not going to plug it in every single time. Sometimes if they're more difficult, you'll need to, but right now I know it's just 3 more for my y value. Whatever y is going to be 3 more than that x, so I'm not going to spend the time to plug them in. We're just going to say, okay, -4 plus 3, well, that's a -1. Oh, that doesn't look like a -1. -1. 0 plus 3 would just be 3, and 3 plus 3 is 6. So there you have it for the next example. I believe this example also asks you to graph it. So let's go ahead and do that. Oops. All right. Wow, I guess I can rotate it. That's kind of cool. Didn't know that. All right, here's my crooked graph, and we're going to kind of put these 4 points on here. -4, -1 would be right here. 0, 3 is right here, and 3, 6 would be right here. Now, there's something unique about this that we'll address later. We can kind of see that they look like they're going in a... We'll get to that fun stuff later, but for now, all you need are those 3 points. Okay. Definitely the last example, and this part's a little bit more difficult. I'm going to show you a section of a graph. So let's say I had some point here at -2, 2, and some point here at 0, -1. And yet, instead of like on our last one, how you could see there was a little bit of a line, it looked like it could be there. I'm going to actually draw this line. Okay, so if you see 2 points and they're connected together, that means I don't have a bunch of points along the way, like oh, boop, 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 boop. There's actually an infinite number of points that are there, and to the point where it's everything in between, every tiny little decimal. So I can't just write a bunch of numbers for my domain and my range this time. So my domain is all values of x, right? And before, if I just had these 2 points, I would say, oh, hey, my domain, it's -2 and it's 0. Done. Easy peasy, right? Well, I know those are my end points, but goodness, it's all the things in between as well, and they don't want to be left out. They're not going to like you very much if you leave them out like that. So this is where inequalities come back in a little bit. If it's everything in between and all of these points, if you think about it in terms of if you think about this in terms of all of your values of x, any value of x from here all the way to here is included in your domain. Okay? All right. So we need to have this written as an inequality. So my domain is not 2 numbers. It is going to be everything from -2, and it's going to be more than that, but less than or equal to 0. Do you see how these are my 2 endpoints that I'm writing? Okay, my -2, and my highest point is my 0. And then I'm going to use these inequalities. Now, when you put 2 inequalities together, we're going to read this across, and we're going to read -2 is less than, remember, makes the L. -2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 0. Okay? Now, if you read this backwards, 0 is greater than or equal to x, which is greater than or equal to -2. So what we really have is 2 sets here, right? We could say that x is, or we could write it this way, x is greater than or equal to -2, but x is also less than or equal to 0. And do you see how this has to be eating him a little bit this way? Kind of just flip this and put them together into 1. And that shows everything from here to here. All of those values of x are my domain. Okay? So that's your answer for your domain. I know these are tricky. For my range, if I were you, I can't really show you. I guess maybe I can. Let's see if I can do this, figure out how I did it before. Now I'm not going to be able to figure out how to turn it like I wanted to before. Oh, okay. So I guess that doesn't really work. Okay, if I were to turn my graph, let's see if I can just undo that, because now it's going to be all messed up. All right, nope, still moving. There we go, that's where I want him. If you were to turn your whole thing, and you can't see me turning mine, and you were to read your y-axis as the axis that we're looking at our numbers, it's going to be, what's our lowest point, right? These are our negative numbers, so what's our highest point? Everything in here is my range, okay? Everything between those. So my lowest point for my range, or if you were just writing the numbers, right, we would look at our y values and we'd say, hey, well, my y value is I have a 2 and I have a -1. Well, which one is smaller? My -1, here's my range equals -1 and a +2. Now, instead of using this x, because that's what domain is, I'm going to use a y. So the y has to be greater than or equal to that -1, and I'm reading this kind of backwards. Remember, it has to eat whichever one's bigger, and it's going to be less than or equal to 2. So here's my answer for my range. Okay, I think that is probably all the stuff we've got to cover. I want you to try 1 through 15 all this time. Check with the homework that's on the board or on the RenWeb, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you tomorrow for functions.